Okay, hello, welcome back to another video on the Will Taylor Chess channel. Today I'm taking you through a game played in 2010 in Amsterdam by Hikaru Nakamura against a man who goes by the name of Loek van Velde. Loek van Velde is a very strong grandmaster, so strong in fact that he was ranked amongst the top 10 players in the world in 2001 with a FIDE rating of 2714. He is still an active player with a FIDE rating currently of 2644, I believe, and was a former member of the Senate of the Netherlands. The latter fact admittedly doesn't really speak to his chess ability, I just thought it was pretty cool. Anyway, this is therefore without a doubt a very strong grandmaster. I would bet a lot of money in fact that he could survive at least 20 moves against the best engine on the planet. Against Hikaru Nakamura, not so much. This game was played with a 100% accuracy by Hikaru and was ended on the 17th move by just a brilliant gem of tactical genius, which I cannot wait to show you. So without further ado, let's get into the game. Hikaru opened with e4, to which Van Velde replied with c5, a Sicilian defense. Now this is an immediate declaration of violence. Van Velde is clearly not afraid to fight for a win, even against Hikaru. And we see this further as the opening progresses. We see knight f3, then we see d6, d4, takes, very standard stuff, knight f6, knight c3, and the move here, a6. Tells us that this is a Najdorf variation. The Najdorf was named after the Polish-Argentinian master Miguel Najdorf. The Sicilian Najdorf is, I don't think it's unfair to say, the most popular variation in the whole Sicilian, which in and of itself is the most exhaustively theorized about opening in the whole of chess. If you're familiar with the game of chess at a high level, you will have seen the Najdorf plenty of times, I'm sure. The key to this opening selection is basically flexibility. A6 is something of a prophylaxis, basically saying white has no immediate threat, and you know, eventually we're going to play probably e5, maybe put the bishop on e6, bishop e7 and castle kingside, but it's not so obvious whether, for instance, this knight wants to be on c6 or d7, whether the bishop wants to be on d7 or maybe b7 at some point, a6 supporting the idea of b5. Out of 150,000 games in the Masters database in this position here, 100,000 of them, over 100,000, played a6. This is a super common choice at the top level. So in light of this move a6, if you're not familiar with the Najdorf, what can white go for here? I mean, the best moves and the most common moves all involve these bishops moving here. You can play h3 in some lines, but generally speaking, the knights are developed. Let's develop our other minor pieces. However, again, quite a flexible opening, and in flexible openings, where there are far less forced variations, it becomes far more dense of a theory tree. If you imagine that each move the players only have one or two moves each, then this theory tree only, occasionally bifurcates, and it will spread out, but it will be sort of manageable. In this position, masters are playing bishop e2, bishop e3, bishop g5, also bishop c4, with, a relatively even spread. 34% of games from here in the Masters database go for bishop e3. Bishop g5 is 21%, bishop e2 is 14%, bishop c4 is 7%. It's relatively well distributed. And so this is why it's such a complicated opening, because there are so many different ways to play against it and to play it. Hikaru here elects to play bishop to g5. The point of bishop g5 is effectively, I'm threatening to take your knight. And double pawns on the f-file, if you take with the g-pawn or with the e-pawn, are going to cause some problems. I mean, if black plays a6 here, we'll turn on the engine, but yeah, you see, the best move is just to take, because, if they recapture here, then this is a horrible isolated pawn. Also, they don't have the ability to play e6 anymore, so bishop c4 is going to be very strong, going for the king. It's not pleasant, and if you take with the g-pawn, which is the better move, then, I mean, queen h5 immediately is a big problem, but also, where's this king castling? It's going to be a weak piece for the rest of the game, just positionally speaking, and if you have a weak piece for the rest of the game, if that piece is your king, it does not bode well. So after bishop g5, there are generally accepted to be two different ways to deal with this at the top level. It's either e6, the most common, such that if e6 and bishop takes here, the queen can simply take on f6. Or there's also the move knight b to d7, because after bishop takes, there would then be knight takes here, and white would have just lost the bishop pair for no structural damage as compensation. This would obviously not be a good idea to take, so knight d7 is also, or knight b d7, sorry, is another move. Now, knight b d7 is actually the move we see in the game. It's the less popular one, only played 17% of the time, to e6 is 80% of the time. However, before we look at what's going to happen in the rest of the game, I want to take you down a little detour. And that little detour involves looking at what happens if they go for e6. Now, many of you might be familiar with this position, but the main move here is to play f4. Then after queen b6, which is again the main move, this is known as the poisoned pawn variation. The reason for that is that after queen d2, white offers up this b pawn here. You can just take this pawn. It is in fact the best move to do so, by far the most commonly played move at master level. The reason it's called a poison pawn variation is because it's been calculated exhaustively that white gets plenty of compensation with this open b file. There are hugely dense lines here like a queen a3, e5, h6, bishop goes back, and then after takes, g5, we take the knight, they take the bishop. Like, this is all established theory, played in nearly 1,000 games in the database. Basically an absolute mess that we're not going to get into right now. But keep in mind that after queen b6 in this position, if after they played e6, this is known as the poisoned pawn variation, okay? Accepting this pawn here, while it is the best idea, gives white plenty of compensation. Keep that idea in your head. As we have a look now at the real game. So knight comes to d7. We then see f4 anyway by Hikaru, queen b6, queen d2. And we're in effectively the same position. We've seen queen b6, we've seen f4, and we've seen queen d2. The difference is that instead of e6, there's a knight here on d7. Now, this is not the poison pawn variation, but it is arguably just a worse version of that variation for reasons that will become apparent very quickly. Bear in mind, we are on move 8. This game ends in the next 9 moves. Van Velde takes the pawn. Rook b1 from Hikaru. And then Van Velde goes to a3. I mean, if he went anywhere else, his queen would have been hanging. Queen a3 is forced here. Okay, this all makes sense. We're on move 9 now. This game ends in 8 moves. And here, Hikaru makes a decision that I would never have even thought about playing. I mean, that is why he is, you know, one of the best players in the world, and I am distinctly not. And he takes the knight. Now, the reason this is weird is that, okay, well, if he had to recapture with one of the pawns, it would make sense. At least at face value. I mean, you're causing some structural damage. You're giving up your bishop pair. It makes sense. But he recaptures with the knight, of course. I mean, that's kind of the point of putting the knight here. We talked about it. You do not have to double the pawns on the f-file here. However, after this exchange, Hikaru lurches forward with e5. Bear in mind, this is a 100% accurate game from Hikaru. Every single move is computer perfect. Stockfish cannot find a fault with this game. e5, takes, and the knight goes back to d7. In the position before he moved the knight, the evaluation was +2. Hikaru has an attacking advantage despite being down a pawn, despite not having the bishop pair, and it kind of seems obvious as to why. He has superior development with both the knights, the rook on the open b file, the queen on the open d file, the pawn on e5, and black cannot move this bishop. Black's bishop is trapped in here, and if they can't move the bishop, they can't move this rook. If they can't move this bishop, they can't move this rook. And that helps explain why knight d7 was actually a blunder from Van Velde. I mean, here, if we look at all 4 of these pieces, that is 16 points of material. The bishops literally can't move, and the rooks, they might as well not be able to move, as the only possible moves are these 1 square adjustments to completely inactive places. Whereas if we pause and look at Hikaru's position, super open bishop, super open rook, super open queen, knights can dance, and what is this queen doing on a3? Van Velde here should have played knight to g4, however there would have still been some very interesting ideas with knight to d5, basically going straight for c7, and after queen c5, there was actually knight to b3, I think, attacking the queen. We'll see similar ideas to this in what actually happened. The point is that even if Van Velde had played the best move going over here with the knight, it's still probably Hikaru who's going to win this game. I mean, he's still like +2 and of advantage. However, after Van Velde goes back, Hikaru jumps in with the knight. And you see that both of these knights are in the center squares of the board. Centralizing your knights is a huge idea in chess. They are very slow pieces. They can't traverse the board as easily as maybe a bishop could, or a queen could, or a rook could. They take moves to get to places. And so a knight on g3 is going to be kind of useless attacking something over here, whereas a bishop on g3 might be able to hit that in 1 move. Having knights in the center, therefore, means they are close and ready to do damage to squares that are going to be very, very useful, just generally speaking. I mean, the most obvious square here is, of course, the c7 square. Hikaru is currently just threatening a fork on the king and the rook. The dark squares are incredibly weak, so this square is also what is known as a hole, basically a square which no pawn can defend. And after queen to c5, defending this fork, I mean, what else was he going to do? Play king d8? Hikaru goes for knight to b3, attacking the queen, of course, and also defending his knight. And the queen has to move. Now, where can it move to? Well, it has to hold on to this c7 square. It cannot go to b6 or a5. Those squares are both held by the knights. It also cannot go to d6 here. That square is held by the pawn. c4 is held by the bishop. c3 is held by the queen. c2 is held by the queen. There's effectively 1 move for the queen here. If they try to run over here, I mean, first of all, that just hangs the queen, but there's also a fork. The queen has to go to c6. And now that the queen's gone to c6, I mean, why stop attacking it? These knights are dancing around. Knight to a5. Jumping in here, putting the knight on the edge of the board. However, the knights here, the way they're configured with 2 squares between them, mean that they hold all of these squares here. It's like if you have a knight on f3 and a knight on c3 at the start of the game and they control all the central squares. It's the same configuration, just moved all the way up the board so that the knights are just holding all of these important squares. The queen now goes back to c5, the point being that, after the knight moved and forced the queen away, the knight's moved again so the queen can come back, and Hikaru takes on b7, attacking the queen with a knight again. Hikaru has attacked the queen with this knight, forced it back to c6, attacked the queen with the knight again, forced it up to c5, and then attacked the queen with the knight for the final time on b7 with the same knight. This knight is the bane of this queen's existence. Now some of you might be thinking, okay, well he can just take the knight here, right? No, because then rook takes b7, and we see that the open b file granted to us by the acceptance of this poison pawn here, even though it's not technically the poison pawn variation, but is extremely similar, the rook is now in and active. We are threatening knight c7 again, and if you go rook c8 to try and stop it, we can take here. The whole queen side has collapsed. There are just no pawns here anymore. We are threatening incredible tactics. When I say we are threatening them, Hikaru's threatening them. One of these tactics being, let's say Van Velde plays a completely nonsensical move like a6, bishop to b5, pinning this knight. The queen is going to attack after the knight moves, so knight to f6 is now a threat if we see another stupid move. Obviously he would not play these moves, but the idea is in the position. Knight to f6 check, and after you take, this is going to be checkmate. The point is that allowing this rook into here is a terrible idea. So again, Van Velde plays queen c6. The queen has oscillated like, as I always say, a depressed Newton's cradle between c5 and c6, and then back to c5, and now back to c6 again. And here, for those of you who have been counting the moves, is move 16. Now I said this game ended on move 17. If you want to pause the video and try and find this move, be my guest. If you find it, you should try and, drop everything and study to become a grandmaster, because oh my goodness, this tactic is one of the most deep, juicy, beautiful looking moves I have ever seen. Hikaru Nakamura in this position finishes his 100% accurate game, every move perfect, with a brilliant move, rook to b6. And in this position, Van Velde resigns. Now, why did he resign? Let's look at the most obvious thing first. This rook is hanging. The knight can take the rook, but can it? Because then knight to f6 check. And why is knight to f6 so beautiful? Because whatever you take this with, obviously taking with queen, taking with pawn, taking with the other pawn, none of it matters, because queen to d8 will be checkmate. This knight that is hanging in two different ways is the most crucial piece ever here on b7, controlling the d8 square to allow this queen to punish the king for never getting castled safely, staying in the center of the board. As Hikaru's king, who also never got castled safely and stayed in the center of the board, laughs. So, knight takes rook is not a move, because knight f6 and queen d8 checkmate. We've established that. Now, can the queen take the rook? No. The reason being that we can take that queen, and even if you try and get some compensation here, like say you try and take this knight, both of these knights are seemingly hanging. If you try and take this one, we are going checkmate on d7 with the queen, and if you try and take this one, same problem on d8. So even though it seems you could maybe get a rook and a knight for a queen, it's not so bad. You also have an extra pawn maybe, so actually no, you've definitely lost the pawn by now. But the point is, maybe it seems like it's playable. It's absolutely not, because there are still checkmate threats all over the place. So we've established the two different pieces that could take this rook. Neither of them can take this rook. Now, that poses a huge problem for Van Velde's queen. The reason being, the queen cannot stray across the 6th rank here, because the rook controls all these squares. It cannot stray back to c7, because the knight holds this square, and that would... I'm going to save that for later. It can't take the knight because we are holding it. It can't take the rook, as we've discussed. It can't go to b5 because... Sorry, let me carry on using red, sorry. That is not red. It can't go to b5 because of the bishop. And it can't go down here because of this knight. It can't go to c4 because of the bishop. It can't go to c3 because of the queen. Or to c2 as well because of the queen. It cannot take the knight because of the queen. So the only remaining move for the queen is to venture off to a4. Queen a4. Checkmate. Knight c7 checkmate. What the... look at this move. So in this position, of course, Van Velde resigned and Hikaru played a 100% accurate game. 17 moves, finished by a beautiful, artistic, excellent move that any player from the Romantic period of chess, Paul Morphy, Louis Charles, Mahé de la Bourdonnais, any of these GOATs, Adolf Anderson, they would have been proud of this. This is the kind of game that really underpins the idea that it is not just checkmate that is important, it is winning beautifully that is important. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, like, comment, subscribe, do all that stuff that helps out the channel, and I will see you in the next video. If you guys enjoyed this type of video where I go through like a master level game, then let me know in the comments and I will try and make more of them. But thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.